Hey, what's up everybody? It's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and in today's video we're going to talk about the MMX 330 Pro. This is an open acoustic or open back headset from Beyerdynamic, and of course they make the closed version, which I reviewed I think about a month or two ago. Link in the description for that, and that is the MMX 300. So ironically, the MMX 300 was $300 US, and the MMX 330 is $330 US. Obviously a coincidence, but you know, I'm going to point those out because when I see the correlations, I have to talk about it. So it's an interesting headphone product because it's a little bit expensive for an analog wired gaming headset when you compare it to some others out there, such as the Drop PC38X, for example, or some other alternatives that have come out prior. They used to be a little bit less money, but what makes this different is it uses the Stellar 45 driver. Both of these do, found in the more expensive studio grade Beyerdynamic headphones. Now there are a couple specs to consider as far as what's catering to the gamer community. Obviously you can slap a mic on something and call it a gaming headset, but there are other things to consider. One of them is how easy it is to drive. Now both of these, because they're using the same driver, they're both 48 ohms impedance, and they're fairly sensitive and easy to drive. The reason why it's important to mention this early is if you are buying this and connecting it to an Xbox controller or a PlayStation controller, for example, something that's not known to have a lot of amp power, well, these are still supposed to work, and they do. I tested it on both platforms without any issues. They get quite loud. As far as what you get in the box, it's terminated with a dual 3.5 millimeter connection. Now this is kind of cool because the way the pins are grounded, when you look at the other side, there are multiple rings here. This is important because of the grounding and the way it's set up as far as separating the mic and everything. All of this is going through a single cable. Now, when you connect it to this adapter, which is included in the box, this is a dual 3.5 TRS to a 3.5 millimeter TRRS. And this is what connects to your controller. So whenever you combine this, you have to consider any kind of electrical crosstalk. It's not really an issue with this headset because it's an open acoustic or open back, so when you turn it up loud, the microphone's going to pick up some of that noise later, so I will be doing a mic test to kind of show you what I mean. Now the cable's actually quite long, and the way it's jacketed or sleeved is this like TPU rubber. It's nice because it doesn't have any real microphonics issues, which is really important, especially on a closed back. It seems to be durable, but it's a little bit springy. It doesn't really like to listen to you as far as when you want to wrap the cord. And if you're playing with console and you're connecting this to a controller, this 2.5 meter long cable can get a bit long. Now, I do recommend just using a couple Velcro straps if you know you're always going to play on controller just to shorten it. The other thing is, like, you can see how even just wrapping it once, if I try to do it again, it really doesn't want to stay. So the only real solution I found to this type of cable is you have to do something called a roadie wrap, where basically instead of twisting it this way, you have to go the other way on the next loop. I'm going to turn it again, and then you can see I'm kind of like twisting it to make the cable cheat itself, and kind of you're using the twist to guide the cable. When you do that, the part that I did successfully wrap, it kind of lays more flat, and that's what I would do to twist it. Otherwise, it's quite long. Now you have an inline mute switch and volume rocker. This volume rocker, I pointed this out on the MMX 300. When you're spending over $300 for a headset, this is a basic feeling volume rocker. It gets the job done, but I wish it was a little bit larger or metallic or something that, you know, feels a little bit more premium. I do like the mic switch though, so it's very easy to do, and this tactility is super important because if you are in game and you need to quickly mute yourself, you should be able to just quickly grab it and flip that up and down. So ergonomically, I love the mic switch. The volume switch is fine. Again, it's easy to do because it's textured, it's very easy to spin. And also on that note, check it. Because if you're turning it up and you're like, why is this headset not that loud? Maybe you turned your volume rocker down. And when it's connected, up is up on the volume. Getting into build quality and comfort, it's kind of an interesting couple things to consider with the 330 Pro. So they look very similar to the 300. You know, when you look at it, the top-down view, if you look very closely, you can see that the pads look a little bit different. I'll get into that in a moment, but you have the vent here. That's the easiest way to know that you have the open back version as opposed to actually seeing the 330 versus the 300 on the side. Other than that, they look and feel basically identical. It's the same exact headband system. Clamp force is the same. I even measured that to confirm it was the same. It's close enough, and it's a little bit of a variance on smaller heads just because the pads are a little bit different. Now this side again looks identical as well. They have the same exact termination. There's no controls or volume dials on the headsets themselves. And just like the 300, the 330 microphone is not removable. This is a little bit notchy. You can get used to it if you use it for a while, but if you ever want to flip the mic up out of the way and you do it from up here, well, it kind of sticks in place, so you basically want to grab it here. Now, this microphone's not removable, and it's interesting because the mic is not flipped to mute, even though it flips all the way up and out of the way. So if you want to use this as a headphone, the mic will always be there, but you can at least pull it out of the way so it's not like in your face. The other thing that's interesting is I can actually flip this all the way the other way. Now, it's not as simple as just flipping it this way and then turning it around and wearing it, because it's still going to be terminated with that single connector. It's not like you can flip-flop the wires depending on, you know, what model you get out there. So if you ever did do this because you wanted to wear the microphone on the right, this is a symmetrical design. It doesn't have to go one way or the other. Even the baffles are straight. But if you did do this, just make sure you reverse your left and right channels and windows or whatever you're using, especially if you're playing games. I would just stick with it the way it comes out of the box, but if you flip it, just remember to switch your channels around. Otherwise, you're going to be very confused where audio cues are coming from. Now, both of these have the same pad opening size of 55 millimeters, and they're round, so that's pretty much all the way across. This one has a little bit of a different skin feel. So if you listen to the 300 Pro, kind of like a scratchier sound, and you compare it to the 330 open back, it's quiet. The skin feel is just a little bit better on this, especially in hand, but on your head when you're actually wearing it, it's a little bit harder to discern the difference. It's not like one is going to feel rough or anything. What you do feel though is the depth. Now the 330 Pro is a little bit less deep than the 300 Pro. The 300 Pro still has this acoustic disc over the front, the driver baffle itself, and the center puck, or like that little circle right there, it sticks out just a little bit. I never really touched that disc on the 300 Pro. These were just deep enough where I fully cleared it and my ears had enough space to breathe. On the 330 Pro, there's less depth to work with, and straight up, when I put this on, I immediately feel my ears touching that baffle. Like, there's no way of getting around it. You can try to stretch it, you can lightly caress the headphone or headset on your ears just in case. This is the biggest difference, and where I'm not as much of a fan, but it's kind of odd. So when you first put it on, you expect, like, you know, world-class comfort at over $300 for this price range. And initially it feels a little hard and a little unrefined, I guess. And I'm not doing this to roast the headset, because I will be saying some good things about it. But the pads are a little bit stiffer. Again, this is part of the tuning principles of it. That's just a byproduct of that. Clamp force is decent, and then the headband, even though, yeah, it's padded, this is like a little lumpy here, and it's not so much that the foam isn't enough. These stitches and intentional creases kind of create a little bit of a pressure point, so you feel like slightly inconsistent pressure on your head. You can tell where some of the cuts and folds are, and I usually don't get that with other headsets or headphones. You know, it's kind of funny because I thought I was going to have some serious issues with comfort with this. I did not like it in the first few minutes I put it on because, frankly, I don't like my ears touching the baffle. I've never been a super fan of that, and I had the same issue with the Tiger 300R, even though I have a lot of hours on that open back headphone headset, and I will be talking about that later too. So what's weird about this is because it's light, because the clamp force is rather moderate, I still could wear this for a long period of time. I always felt my ears touching the baffle, but only just. So it didn't create any like extreme pressure. The difference with something like this when you compare it to the SteelSeries Nova Pro Wireless when that first came out is that one had an active noise cancellation bump that protruded from a little fabric cover. That was more uncomfortable after a while because it was more concentrated. This is a padded disc that's just barely kissing my ear. So your mileage will vary greatly depending on your ear shape and how much this kind of thing bothers you. You know, if you're not bothered by it at all because you have more of an on-ear headphone, then it's not going to be an issue, but it is one thing that I noticed. I can still wear this for long gaming sessions, which I was surprised by that. The 300 closeback version is a little bit more comfortable because of that, because my ears never touched. And what would a headset review be without a microphone test? And I think the 330 Pro microphone sounds absolutely fantastic. It's voiced well, it has a little bit of warmth to it, and there's no shrill or shriekiness up top. So even if you have a higher pitched voice or a more harsh sounding voice, this microphone's not going to make that worse or accentuate that. So I think they did a really good job with the mic. It's just the same way as the 300 Pro, but I am going to play some background noise so you can hear what I'm talking about as far as picking up what the headphone is playing as well.
and I want to compare it to the drop PC38X so you can hear something, because this could be a major thing for people. Okay, so I'm playing some music in the background while I talk to you again, and I'm not doing any correction in post-production. There's no noise filters turned on the G8, and this is what the background noise pickup is like on the 330 Pro. It's not electrical, it's actually picking up some of the noise from the ear cups, but I just wanted to hear it. So I'm going to shut up for a minute so you can hear just the sound. Now we're going to head over to the drop PC38X. So here's that same song playing on the drop PC38X, and I did volume match it, so I'm not cheating any of that. This picks up a little bit more noise, so I'm going to be quiet again. You can hear what I'm talking about. All right, so I'm talking to you on the MMX 300 Pro now, which is the closeback version. I'm going to pause talking to see if you can hear any of that music here. And there you have it.
So I thought that was a pretty interesting test because you can hear the music on all three, and there's two ways to consider why this is happening. One is the acoustic side of things, where the microphone is literally just picking up some of the volume that's coming from the drivers themselves. So this is going to be greatly affected by how loud you listen to it. The other thing that could be happening, and this is why I wanted to use this adapter on all three devices, is when you connect everything to a single TRRS connection, the ground connection is shared with both left and right driver and the microphone. So if you play it loud enough, some of that crosstalk happens where the microphone signal will pick up electrically some of what you're hearing as well. This is just an issue with any wired headset or headphone that uses a shared ground for connections. So if you can break it up into separate ones, then yeah, it could help, but it's still not going to fix the acoustic side of things where the microphone's actually replaying what your drivers are playing. So either listen to it at a lower volume if you don't want your friends to hear what you're saying, or what you can and should do regardless is leverage some kind of noise suppression software on the PC, Xbox, whatever you're using. Some apps and games will have some of their own noise suppression or even a noise gate. That will fix the problem. If you're using Crisp on Discord, if you're using Sonar for SteelSeries with the Clearcast AI, all of these will remove a lot of that background noise so you just hear your voice. So just keep all that in mind. It's just a byproduct of an analog microphone. As far as how the 330 Pro sounds, well, it's a very linear, very tight bass, but there isn't a lot of roll off in the sub bass either, so I quite like that it's relatively flat. Also makes it very easy to EQ because you're not dealing with tons of dips and peaks. So this is really helpful if you are using it on console and you only have a 10-band EQ, such as something like Dolby Atmos, and you just want to boost bass in general, where it's much easier now to address that because everything is flat. The same thing kind of happens in the mid-range and all the way up to low treble, where when you have this like linear lift, it's very easy to gradually lift and lower things later, and things sound more natural. So I do like the sound signature of the 330 Pro out of the box. It's actually quite nice. And this dip here, this is like the pinna gain area. If there's going to be a dip anywhere on this frequency response graph, you typically want it in that area. Not to an extreme, because we perceive a lot of detail here, and if that's too recessed, it might sound like it's less clear than it really is. It's kind of like human perception. So again, you can always boost that up, but if it's too forward or too bright in this area, sometimes that can cause listening fatigue as well. Anything in the treble region in general, if it's far too forward or too bright, depending on your hearing health and how sensitive you are to treble, that can always cause issues. So I am very pleased with the sound signature out of the box. Now I want to compare it to a couple others here. If you look at the MMX 300 Pro, you can see a very different sound signature. Now, a lot of this was intentional from Beyerdynamic because they wanted to address a different soundscape. They wanted the 300 or the closeback to be more immersive and impactful, and then more detailed, in this case, more pronounced highs. The biggest issue I have, obviously there's a strong bass shelf there, not the end of the world because a lot of people like stronger bass. It's not as big of a difference on my ear as this would suggest, depending on what you're listening to, but the bass is definitely elevated. Now there is a scoop at 1.5K. That's just a byproduct of how it's tuned. That can kind of help create a pseudo soundstage. So it does recess vocals a little bit, but it can make the headphone sound a little bit wider because the higher frequencies are elevated in comparison to it. The other thing I want to point out with the 300 Pro is this peak right here in the 6,000 hertz area. It is quite strong, like 5 or 6 decibels stronger in that area than the 330 Pro or even the drop PC38X. So if you look at things like the Tiger 300R, which is in red, and the drop PC38X, which I'm going to change color because that's going to be hard to spot. Let's get rid of the closeback version. So I'm going to get rid of the 300 Pro in a minute. you can see that these are more in line. Now the older Tiger 300R had a much warmer, almost like a boxy, thicker sounding sound profile. And you can see that red line where it lifts up in that upper bass area. It had great tuning otherwise. This area is really nice. And if I compare it, just those two together, you can see that in some cases, some people might even like the Tiger 300R's vocal tuning more, particularly in the 800 to 3000 hertz area. And when you compare it directly to the Drop PC38X, that's an amazing headset. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, and it has a little bit more bass and I think a generally safer treble tune because the treble isn't as forward or bright, especially everything over 5000 hertz. Now, some people want more treble. If you buy headsets or headphones and often add treble to it, well, you'll probably like the 330 Pro out of the box anyway, but at least you have an idea how they compare on a measurement side. I want to quickly touch on electrical impedance because not everyone will know what this means, but it is an important thing to consider for some out there. So this is rated at 48 ohms. That's the nominal impedance of the headphone. And when you see that number, the higher the ohms or impedance, if it has the same sensitivity as another headphone, well, that headphone with higher impedance will be a little bit more quiet at the same volume setting on your amp. You can have high impedance headphones like a 300 ohm headphone that is very easy to drive, which is, means high sensitivity, that can still be louder than a 32 ohm headphone that is more difficult to drive because it's less sensitive. So it's not always apples to apples, but in this case, this is a fairly sensitive headphone. 48 ohms means you can connect it to basically anything, including a game controller. However, there is something called an impedance curve. And what happens is, especially with dynamic headphones, standard dynamic driver, the impedance changes based off frequency. And there's a resonance frequency or resonant frequency that's typically a bit higher than the normal impedance, which will cause it to have a different sound profile depending on what you're connecting it to. This is more on the extreme case, and it's not a major change, but you can gain a few decibels, especially in the bass region, if a headphone has a very large impedance swing and you're connecting it to a high output impedance. So if this is rated at 48 ohms, but in this case, as you can see on the measurements, we have a peak all the way up to about 186 ohms. Well, if you hook this up to a high output impedance amplifier, chances are you're going to have a little bit more bass down there. Now, what's interesting about this particular one, my copy of the 330 Pro, is I never quite got down to the 48 ohm impedance rating. I bought equipment to measure this accurately, by the way, but I'm down to about 57 ohms. Now, if we look at the 300 Pro, the 300 Pro is the same thing. It has less of a resonant frequency, and the resonance frequency comes a little bit lower, closer to about 61 hertz, as opposed to a center of about 68. So the closed-back version of the 300 won't be as sensitive depending on what amplifier you have it connected to. Now, I did connect the Drop PC38X as well, which has a much lower impedance. It still has a little bit of a hump, but this is not as big of a difference as that. You might still see a little bit of a bass lift on a Drop PC38X with a high output impedance amp, but I just wanted to show you that. And at least this one did come in at closer to about 26 ohms for my unit. So here's where it gets interesting. When it comes to real world sound experiences, whether it's gaming or music, there are some things I really like about the 330 Pro, and there are things or times where I prefer a different headset or headphone. When I compare it to specifically for gaming, when you listen to the 300, which is the closed back version, that stronger bass is amazing for immersive games. If you're playing single player games, casual games, and you want a little bit more bass and explosion because you want to get more sucked into the moment, well, the closed back is going to give you that. The only byproduct though is because it has elevated treble, one, to somewhat compensate, but to also have a different target profile in general, you might find that treble a little bit too bright. So if you EQ down the whole 6,000 hertz to 8,000 hertz area, well, now it becomes a more enjoyable headset, and then you still get that bass shelf. Now, when I'm playing games like Call of Duty or FPS games, this is where the 330 Pro does shine, and this is where it shows the benefits of having an open back version of that same headset using the same driver. The one thing you notice right off the bat, if you ever are fortunate enough to have both of these and you A/B them, is when you're running, this sounds more like a combat boot. There's more of a thump and a heavy landing anytime a foot hits the ground. Whereas this one, it's almost like you turned into, a hard sole sneaker. A lot of that bass is sucked out, and you do hear a lot of the details, and it's very easy to pinpoint stuff. I find that I was always consistently more competitive with the 330 Pro just because the sound signature is more neutral, and it just sounds easier to hear the subtle things that I particularly care about that aren't necessarily competing with other sounds. One of the issues with the 300 Pro in the 6,000 to 8,000 hertz area is depending on what game you play, like Call of Duty, when you break glass, shoot guns, or there's an airstrike, that whole 6,000 to 8,000 hertz area is used like crazy, and that can cause listening fatigue, which means your general volume is lower because you're compensating for those peaks that might be too strong in the first place. Well, the 330 Pro doesn't suffer from that same emphasis, which means I can focus more on the frequencies I do care about. Now, when you looked at the frequency response, you probably saw the Tiger 300R and said, you know what, that's more my speed. Well, it's not just frequency response. I feel like with the Tiger 300R is even if I EQ'd it to be identical in frequency response between this and the 330 Pro, the 330 Pro is just more resolving. Part of what you're paying for is the clarity and the ability to pull out more of the nuances both in music and gaming. It just seems to do it more naturally without needing EQ to cheat to give you more detail, which again causes fatigue. I still love the Tiger 300R. I used it a ton. I actually have the Antlion mod mic on here because I used it as a gaming headset for a long period of time. More so than the Drop, because this actually has less clamp force than the Drop PC38X and the new 330 Pro. Not by a lot, but it is noticeable, and I still enjoyed wearing it for that reason. The Drop PC38X is still a really safe pick if you just listen to a wide variety of genres, you don't crave extreme amounts of bass, and you listen to it at healthy listening volumes, if you're not playing it at crazy loud volumes, for example. I think it's a safer tune. The rolled off treble is going to make it sound like it's less sparkly and detailed to some, again, depending on your hearing health, but I just think it works well for pretty much everything. Now, the 330 Pro is my second favorite of these four, and again, this is just tuning out of the box. If you do mild EQ to tamper some of that treble, if you are sensitive to it, I start liking it more because it has a better power handling envelope for bass. If you do have a couple different EQ profiles because you listen to tracks that are more bass heavy, that's where this thing starts to come to life. Out of the box, the bass sounds a little bit dry. It doesn't have as much texture as some other headphones I've listened to, like the FIO FT1 or even the Aoun AR5000. They have a little bit more of a bass detail presentation out of the box. All right, so here's where things get interesting, and I'm gonna keep it real. On paper, when you look at price, the microphone, build quality, gaming performance, music performance, the Drop PC30X has been a legend for a long time for a good reason. It feels more like a gamer headset. You have a volume wheel on it. You have a flip to mute mic, which is a little bit more traditional. On the 330 Pro, it's more like a headphone with a nice mic sound strapped to it. Now, I like the microphone more on the 330 Pro in terms of the sound profile of it. And I thought that my ears touching the baffle were going to be an issue for long-term comfort, and it hasn't been. I've always been sensitive to this particular chassis design for clamp force. This has caused more comfort issues for me. So I can't say that one is 100% better across the board. Maybe you've owned something like this before and you're just chasing something different. For me, owning and keeping this and using it all the time for gaming, I would do an EQ, I would do a bass shelf, and I would cut the 8,000 hertz area down, wide enough to address that slightly elevated treble, which causes some fatigue. Once I've done that, I am happier owning this headset over all of the others here. Is it worth almost double the price to the Drop PC30X to you? Well, that's up to you, but the envelope is definitely there, and with some EQ, I just think it's awesome, again, for what I've liked and enjoyed lately. So hopefully you found the video helpful. I'm not doing any of this for like commission. I don't do any special affiliate programs with this. I will have links in the description below to help you purchase this if you decide to get any of these. With that being said, thanks so much for the support. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye.